San Francisco in the twilight of the 1960s was a city on edge, gripped by a sequence of killings that felt less like a crime spree and more like a macabre performance. While most predators retreat into the darkness after a strike, this individual did the opposite. He demanded a front-row seat in the public consciousness, inserting himself into the daily lives of every citizen through the morning headlines. Criminal history suggests a reliable pattern. The more a killer strikes, the higher the probability of a fatal mistake. Usually, the pressure of an ongoing investigation forces a slip-up, a dropped item, a surviving witness who can provide a sketch, or a trace of biological material left at a scene. In the logic of forensic science, every contact leaves a trace, and the more contacts a killer makes, the sooner the handcuffs usually click shut. By any standard of the era, the man who called himself the Zodiac was incredibly sloppy. He didn't just kill, he lingered. He left behind a trail of physical breadcrumbs that should have ended the mystery within weeks. 2 young people survived his attacks and looked directly at his face. He sent dozens of pages of handwritten taunts to newspapers, providing hundreds of individual characters for a document examiner to analyze. His crime scenes were not sterile environments. They were chaotic, filled with the physical remnants of a man who seemed remarkably indifferent to his own exposure. The most significant lapse occurred on a crisp October night in the Presidio Heights neighborhood. After killing a driver inside a taxicab, the perpetrator leaned over the front seat. In his haste to secure a piece of the victim's shirt as a trophy, he pressed his hands against the interior of the vehicle. He left behind a series of crisp, bloody fingerprints, clear biological signatures that belonged to no one else on Earth. This creates the central mystery that has haunted investigators for over half a century. We have the survivor's descriptions. We have the killer's unique handwriting. We even have the physical impressions of his fingertips recorded in blood. With this abundance of concrete information, we have to ask why the most documented killer in American history remains a ghost. Our modern era, defined by instant databases and DNA sequencing, assumes that physical evidence is an automatic gateway to an identity. But in 1969, the presence of a clue did not guarantee a result. Having the truth in your hands is a far cry from having a system capable of recognizing it. To understand the failure, one has to look at the geography of the North Bay. The killer's path didn't follow a straight line. It zigzagged across a region that was a patchwork of independent towns and rural outposts. The attacks were strategically, or perhaps coincidentally, spread across distinct county lines. Vallejo handled the early shootings. Napa took the lead on the lakeside stabbings. San Francisco assumed control of the city cab murder. Each of these cities operated as a sovereign entity, with its own chief, its own detectives, and its own way of filing reports. In this era, police work was an analog, physical process. There was no central digital hub where a detective in Napa could see what was happening in Vallejo. Information didn't flow across these county borders. It stopped at the edge of the map. Inside these stations, the investigation was a war of paper and ink. Detectives relied on rotary phones to check leads with neighboring towns. If an officer wanted to compare a fingerprint or handwriting sample with a lead in another city, they had to physically mail a copy, or drive it across the bridge themselves. It was a slow, cumbersome system where vital connections were lost in the bureaucracy. This fragmentation effectively neutralized the physical evidence. Because the clues were scattered across 3 different departments, no single investigator had a complete view of the killer's profile. The very evidence that should have identified him was trapped in silos, isolated by the limitations of 1960s communication. While police struggled to coordinate, the killer found a way to bypass them entirely. He realized the fastest way to control the narrative was to speak directly to the public. He began mailing letters to the editors of major regional newspapers. These weren't just simple notes. They were complex packages containing detailed descriptions of the crimes and intricate, hand-drawn cryptograms. He threatened to kill again if his messages weren't printed on the front page. When the San Francisco Chronicle and other major dailies complied, the nature of the case changed. A series of local murders was suddenly transformed into a shared, citywide trauma. The killer successfully hijacked the media to ensure his voice was the loudest in the room. The publication of these letters triggered an immediate secondary crisis. Thousands of citizens, fueled by the terrifying details, began calling the police with tips, theories, and accusations against their neighbors. The phone lines were jammed with false alarms and a rising tide of manufactured confessions from people seeking the spotlight. By forcing the public to focus on his puzzles and his prose, the killer shifted the entire weight of the investigation. Instead of focusing on the physical reality of the fingerprints in the cab or the tire tracks at the crime scenes, detectives were forced to spend thousands of man-hours processing a flood of meaningless tips. The sheer volume of this public distraction paralyzed the hunt, allowing the actual facts to be buried under a mountain of irrelevance. The police department soon resembled warehouses for a lost cause. Investigators were navigating a sea of paper, hundreds of thousands of pages of civilian tips, stacks of interview notes, and endless dead-end leads that had to be filed, cross-referenced, and stored by hand. Under the crushing pressure of the media frenzy and the public's demand for an arrest, the fundamental rules of evidence preservation were sacrificed. In the race to follow up on the latest break in the case, crime scenes were processed with a speed that favored volume over precision. The most damaging failures happened in the newsrooms and laboratories. Before the concept of DNA, the killer's letters were handled with bare hands. Reporters, detectives, and file clerks touched the evidence, leaving behind their own biological traces, and wiping away the killer's original skin cells and saliva. This chaotic environment did more than waste time. The constant, improper handling of the letters and the physical artifacts ensured that the original evidence was permanently degraded. Every hand that touched a letter and every person who breathed over a piece of evidence contributed to the slow, irreversible erasure of the killer's identity. We now live in an age where cold cases are solved with a single strand of hair or a microscopic drop of blood. Our technology has caught up to the crimes of the past, yet the man who called himself the Zodiac remains out of reach. We are separated from the truth by a vast distance in scientific history. In the 1960s, investigators had the physical evidence in their hands but lacked the tools to see what was hidden within it. Today, we have the tools, but the evidence itself has been hollowed out by time. Modern geneticists have attempted to pull a profile from the stamps and envelopes the killer mailed, but the results have been consistently inconclusive. The biological traces have fractured and decayed, contaminated by the decades of touch and the poor storage conditions of the mid-century police files. The Zodiac left an enormous amount of physical information behind. He was visible to his victims, left his blood in a car, and fingerprints cataloged by the FBI. He was a clumsy perpetrator who provided the authorities with everything they needed to catch him. His ultimate success was his ability to create a thick atmosphere of confusion. By feeding a media circus and overwhelming the limited technology of the day, he generated enough social chaos to hide his physical reality. He turned himself into a ghost by ensuring that the police were always chasing his words rather than his tracks. We are left with a chilling realization. The letters, the ciphers, and the fame he sought are the very things that ensured his anonymity. By becoming a legend, he destroyed the evidence that would have made him a prisoner, leaving behind a mystery that is as much a failure of our systems as it was a success of his design.